Where the river bends, the land that birthed Makuria. Before kingdoms are named, before crowns are shaped or prayers are written, there is always a place, a bend in a river, a stretch of stone and wind that quietly waits for people to arrive and give it meaning. To understand Makuria, you must first slow your thoughts and stand beside the Nile where land and water have spoken to one another for thousands of years. The sun is only beginning to rise. Pale light spills gently across the river's surface, turning it silver, then gold. The Nile flows northward in a calm, unbroken rhythm, carrying with it silt, memory, and life. You can hear the soft lap of water against reeds, the distant call of birds waking in the palms. The air is cool now, touched by night, but already the desert beyond the riverbanks holds the promise of heat. This is Nubia, neither fully desert nor fully riverland, but a narrow, precious ribbon between extremes. Here the Nile is not a single smooth highway. It breaks and stumbles over stone-forming cataracts, great stretches of rapids and rocky channels that slow travel and shape destiny. The third cataract lies nearby, its dark rocks rising from the water like ancient guardians. For centuries, these cataracts protected Nubian lands from easy invasion, turning geography itself into a kind of defense. Empires to the north and south learned that this river could nourish, but it could also resist. Makuria would one day rise along these banks, but long before its name was spoken, people were already living in careful harmony with this land. They planted barley and wheat in the fertile soil left behind by the river's floods. They raised cattle and goats, shaped pottery from local clay, and built villages of mud brick and stone that faced the Nile like quiet witnesses to time. Life here demanded patience. Floods could be generous, but they could also fail. Survival depended on reading the river's moods and respecting its cycles. As you walk slowly along the riverbank in your mind, you notice how narrow the green land is. A few hundred meters from the water, life fades quickly into sand and rock. This closeness between abundance and emptiness shaped Nubian thinking deeply. The world felt balanced on a thin edge, fertility on one side, desolation on the other. It encouraged caution, resilience, and a strong sense of community. No one survived alone for long in this landscape. Centuries earlier, another great Nubian kingdom had flourished here, Kush. Its pyramids rose at Meroe, its kings ruled vast territories, and its craftsmen mastered iron and trade. But Kush, too, was shaped by the Nile's slow insistence on change. Trade routes shifted, power waned. By the 4th century, Kush faded, leaving behind ruins, memories, and traditions, but not emptiness. The land did not forget how to hold a kingdom. In the quiet centuries that followed Kush's decline, Nubian communities adapted rather than collapsed. Old political structures dissolved, but local leadership endured. Sacred sites remained sacred. Burial customs persisted. The idea of kingship, of divine authority, tied to land and people survived like embers beneath ash. When new influences arrived from the Mediterranean world, new beliefs, new scripts, new ways of understanding the divine, they entered a society already ancient, already confident in its place. The Nile continued its patient work. Each year its floodwaters arrived, spreading life across the fields, leaving behind dark, rich soil. Farmers timed their planting by the stars and the river's rise. Children learned to swim almost as soon as they could walk. Boats of wood and reed moved slowly along the current, carrying people, grain, and stories from village to village. The river was not merely a resource, it was a shared memory, a living thread binding generations together. Beyond the riverbanks, the desert stretched outward in silence. Low hills of sandstone and granite caught the sun glowing red at dusk. In the far distance lay the Red Sea hills, where veins of gold shimmered beneath the rock. These lands were harsh, but they were not empty. Nomadic groups moved through them, trading with river communities, carrying news and goods across vast distances. Makuria's future wealth would depend not only on the Nile, but on its ability to connect these different worlds. As night falls in this early Nubian landscape, the temperature drops quickly. Stars emerge in astonishing clarity, unbroken by city lights or smoke. Fires flicker in small settlements along the river, their glow reflected in the water. Elders tell stories of ancestors, of spirits, of the land itself. Even before Christianity, Nubian belief systems saw the world as deeply ordered, watched over by powerful unseen forces. The land was alive, deserving of respect and ritual. This sense of sacred geography would later shape Makuria's Christian identity. Churches would be built facing the river. Saints would be painted with Nubian features. Biblical stories would be understood through the lens of flood-drought exile and return experiences already familiar to the people. Christianity did not erase the land's meaning. It layered new symbols upon an ancient foundation. Makuria's heartland lay between the Third Cataract and the Great Bend of the Nile near Dongola. This stretch of river offered both security and connection. It was far enough from Egypt to resist easy control, yet close enough to remain engaged with Mediterranean trade and culture. It was open to Africa's interior, yet grounded firmly in the river's rhythm. Geography, more than conquest, chose Makuria's destiny. When you listen closely, you can almost hear time itself moving here. The soft grinding of stone as water passes, the whisper of wind across fields at dusk, footsteps on packed earth paths worn smooth by generations. This is not a land of sudden change. It teaches patience. It rewards endurance. Kingdoms here do not rise in a single lifetime. They grow slowly, shaped by environment as much as ambition. This story at its heart is about balance between river and desert, old and new, isolation and connection. Makuria would become a kingdom of faith, diplomacy, and resilience, but none of that can be understood without first knowing this place, the quiet strength of Nubia itself. As dawn returns once more, the river continues north, unchanged in its purpose. Soon new beliefs will arrive, kings will be crowned, and walls will rise at Dongola. But for now, you remain here beside the Nile, where Makuria is still only a promise held gently in the land. After Kush fell silent, the great stone cities of Kush did not fall in a single night. They did not burn away in one final war, nor vanish beneath sudden sand. Instead, they grew quiet. Temples emptied. Royal processions faded from the roads. The iron forges cooled, and the long-distance caravans found other paths. What remained was not ruin alone, but space, an open pause in history where new forms of life could slowly take shape. You can feel this silence if you stand among the old places at dusk. Broken walls cast long shadows across the ground. Columns lie half-buried, softened by wind and time. The Nile still moves past them, indifferent yet faithful, as it always has. People did not leave these lands when Kush declined. They stayed adapting quietly, carrying memory forward even as political power dissolved. In the centuries following Kush's fall, Nubia entered a period historians once called a dark age. Though the darkness was never real, life continued, fields were planted, children were born, communities reorganized themselves on smaller, more local scales. Without a centralized empire, authority shifted toward regional leaders, elders, and warrior elites who protected land and people rather than ruling vast territories. This was a time of listening rather than expansion. The land taught restraint. Without the heavy demands of empire, Nubian society became more inward-looking, strengthening local bonds and traditions. Burial practices continued with familiar care. Artistic motifs endured. The idea that rulers were chosen and sanctioned by divine forces never disappeared, it simply waited. Far to the north, the Mediterranean world was changing. The Roman Empire fractured. Christianity spread through Egypt, transforming cities like Alexandria into centers of theology and learning. Monasteries rose along the Nile, and Christian texts traveled southward with merchants, diplomats, and wandering monks. These ideas did not arrive as conquerors. They arrived as whispers. You might imagine a traveler arriving in Nubia during this time, dust on his sandals, a worn scroll tucked into his pack. He speaks of a God who suffers of salvation and resurrection of saints who heal and protect. Nubian listeners do not rush to accept or reject. They listen. They compare these stories to their own understanding of sacred order, of divine kingship, of a world watched over by powerful, unseen forces. Christianity, when it came, found familiar ground. Nubians already believed that rulers stood between heaven and earth. They already saw the landscape as sacred. They already honored ritual fasting and moral order. The new faith did not erase the old world view. It settled into it, reshaping meaning without destroying continuity. During this transitional age, Nubia slowly reorganized into three emerging kingdoms: Nobatia in the north, Makuria in the center, and Alodia in the south. These were not sudden creations, but natural outgrowths of geography and tradition. River bends, cataracts, and trade routes defined political boundaries more effectively than armies ever could. Makuria began as a regional power centered near Dongola, a site chosen not for grandeur but for balance. It lay near fertile land, defensible terrain, and key river crossings. From here, leaders could oversee agriculture, manage trade, and respond to threats from both desert and river. Authority was still fluid, but the seeds of centralized rule were taking hold. This was a time of experimentation. Leaders tested alliances. Communities adapted new administrative practices. Writing systems evolved. Greek and Coptic scripts appeared alongside local languages used first for diplomacy and religious texts, rather than everyday record-keeping. Old Nubian had not yet fully emerged as a written language, but spoken Nubian dialects carried stories, laws, and lineage with precision. Religion continued to shift slowly, like the Nile itself. Christian symbols appeared cautiously: simple crosses, carved into stone modest chapels, built near older sacred sites. Baptism rituals were adapted to local customs. Saints were understood as protectors of land and people, much like earlier divine figures. Faith unfolded gently, without force. At night, villages remained quiet and close-knit. Fires burned low. Families gathered beneath wide skies, heavy with stars. Stories were told not of empires, but of ancestors and land. Children learned where boundaries lay, which families were connected by marriage, which field belonged to whom. Identity was local, but not isolated. Nubians knew they were part of a long continuum. Trade during this era never vanished. It merely changed shape. Gold from the Red Sea hills still moved northward. Ivory hides and grain passed between river and desert peoples. Egyptian merchants ventured south bringing cloth metal goods and religious ideas. In return, Nubia offered stability, a safe corridor through an often fractured region. As generations passed, something new began to solidify. Leadership became more hereditary. Religious authority aligned increasingly with political power. Churches grew larger, more confident. Stone replaced mud brick. Murals began to appear tentative at first, then increasingly elaborate. Makuria was not yet a kingdom of grandeur, but it was becoming a kingdom of coherence. What makes this period remarkable is not conquest, but patience. Makuria did not rush to claim empire. It learned from Kush's decline. It understood that endurance mattered more than spectacle. By blending inherited Nubian traditions with Christian belief and Mediterranean administration, it forged a foundation strong enough to last centuries. This quiet age, often overlooked, was the true beginning of Makuria's strength. It taught flexibility. It preserved memory without clinging to power that no longer served. It allowed faith to grow roots instead of walls. As dawn returns once more along the Nile, the land feels subtly changed. The river is the same, but the people who walk beside it now carry a new sense of order, a growing confidence. The silence after Kush was not emptiness, it was preparation. Ahead lies the rise of Dongola, not as a ruin reborn, but as a living capital shaped by land belief and careful rule. The kingdom is ready to name itself. The rise of Dongola. There is a moment almost imperceptible when a place stops being merely inhabited and begins to rule. It does not announce itself with trumpets or walls raised overnight. It happens quietly through habit, through trust, through the slow gathering of people who sense that here along this stretch of river order can take root. You arrive at Dongola in the early morning. Mist lifts gently from the Nile, drifting across the water like a thin veil. The river curves here, calm but watchful, narrowing slightly, as if to slow those who approach. On the eastern bank, stone outcrops rise from the earth, offering natural defense. On the western side, fertile fields stretch toward the desert's edge. This balance between protection and abundance is why Dongola endures. At first, Dongola is not grand, it is practical. A settlement of clustered home storage buildings and gathering spaces arranged with care rather than ambition. Boats tie up along the riverbank, their hulls worn smooth by years of travel. Farmers arrive at dawn to trade grain. Artisans shape clay in shaded courtyards. Scribes sit cross-legged near doorways, scratching marks into wood or parchment recording agreements and lineages that now matter more than ever. Power begins to concentrate here, not through conquest, but through coordination. Leaders emerge who understand the rhythms of the land and the people. They settle disputes. They organize defenses. They oversee grain storage for years when the Nile's floods are uncertain. Authority becomes something felt rather than imposed, a steady presence rather than a distant threat. As Christianity deepens its hold across Nubia, Dongola becomes a spiritual center as well as a political one. Early churches rise near older sacred spaces, their walls thick and cool, their interiors dim and contemplative. Incense drifts through doorways. Hymns echo softly, carried by voices accustomed to chanting prayers into open desert air. Faith here is not loud. It is deliberate, rooted in daily life. Kings begin to rule from Dongola, though their titles and powers evolve over time. They are not yet distant monarchs, sealed away behind ceremony. They walk among their people, attend rituals, oversee judgments. Their authority is both sacred and practical. They are guardians of land faith and continuity. To rule is not merely to command, but to maintain balance. Stone architecture slowly replaces earlier structures. Walls rise thicker, straighter. Churches grow taller. Murals appear inside sacred spaces. Figures of Christ, the virgin angels and saints, painted with Nubian faces and deep, expressive eyes. These images do not imitate foreign styles blindly. They adapt them. Colors are bold, but restrained. Gold is used sparingly, catching lamplight, like quiet stars against plaster walls. Old Nubian begins to emerge as a written language during this period, used alongside Greek and Coptic. This is no small transformation. To write in one's own tongue is to claim permanence. Legal documents, prayers, and royal decrees begin to reflect local speech and thought. Language becomes another pillar of identity, reinforcing Makuria's independence even as it remains connected to the wider Christian world. Dongola's position allows it to manage trade with confidence. Boats from the north bring Egyptian goods, textiles, metal tools, religious texts. From the south come cattle, ivory, and knowledge of distant lands. Gold from the Red Sea hills moves quietly through the kingdom, not flaunted, but carefully controlled. Makuria does not mint its own coins, relying instead on barter and foreign currency where needed. Wealth here is measured less by gold than by stability. Defense becomes increasingly organized. Watchtowers rise along key river points. Soldiers train with spears and shields, their movements practiced but unhurried. The cataracts remain natural barriers, but Makuria does not rely on geography alone. It understands that strength must be visible enough to deter yet calm enough to avoid unnecessary war. Life within Dongola grows denser. Streets narrow as new buildings appear. Courtyards fill with activity. Children chase one another between columns and walls. Bells ring at prayer times. The rhythm of the city is slow but purposeful, shaped by seasons and ritual rather than haste. There are moments of uncertainty, of course. Leadership is not always smooth. Succession disputes arise, factions form. Yet Dongola's strength lies in its institutions as much as its rulers. Churches provide continuity. Noble families maintain order. The memory of Kush's collapse remains close enough to caution against excess. At night, Dongola is hushed. Fires glow behind walls. The river reflects moonlight broken by the soft movement of boats drifting at anchor. From the church's faint chanting carries into the darkness, steady and reassuring. The kingdom feels enclosed, protected, not isolated, but held. What is forming here is not merely a capital, but a center of gravity. Decisions made in Dongola ripple outward along the Nile, shaping villages hundreds of kilometers away. Disputes are settled here. Treaties are discussed here. Faith is interpreted and reaffirmed here. Makuria is becoming a kingdom not because it declares itself one, but because others begin to look to it. This rise is deliberate, almost cautious. Makuria does not rush toward expansion. It strengthens inwardly first. It refines its identity, Christian, Nubian, independent. It learns when to adopt foreign ideas and when to reshape them. Dongola stands as proof that power does not always shout. Sometimes it speaks softly and lasts longer. As the sun rises again over the river, illuminating stone walls and painted sanctuaries, you sense that Makuria has crossed an invisible threshold. The land has chosen its heart. The people have accepted its rhythm. Faith and authority now move together, shaping a kingdom that will endure centuries of change. Ahead lies a deeper transformation, the full embrace of Christian belief, not just as a religion, but as a worldview that will define Makurian life art and kingship. The coming of the cross. The first light of morning enters Dongola, not as brilliance, but as softness. It slips through narrow openings in stone walls, settles on cool floors, and awakens the painted eyes of saints who watch in silence. Faith has arrived here not as a thunderclap, but as a slow dawn, gradual, steady, impossible to ignore once it has fully risen. You walk toward one of the early churches as bells begin their low measured call. The sound carries across rooftops and courtyards unhurried, echoing gently against stone. People emerge from their homes, farmers, artisans, elders, children, moving together toward the same doors. Christianity in Makuria is not separate from daily life. It is woven into it, like the river's rhythm or the turning of seasons. The coming of the cross did not erase Nubia's past. It reshaped it. Long before missionaries arrived, Nubians understood sacred kingship, ritual purity, and divine order. They believed that rulers stood at the meeting point of heaven and earth. Christianity entered this worldview naturally, offering new language for ideas already familiar. Christ became a divine king who suffered. Saints became guardians. Churches became sacred landscapes within an already holy land. Early missionaries likely came from Egypt, traveling south along the Nile with little more than texts, icons, and conviction. They spoke Greek or Coptic, sometimes haltingly, and relied on interpreters to bridge worlds. They did not force belief. Makuria was not conquered into Christianity. It chose it carefully, deliberately over generations. Baptism ceremonies took place along the river's edge. Water was already sacred here. Now it carried new meaning. The same Nile that fed crops and marked time became a path into spiritual rebirth. You can imagine the quiet of these moments, candidates stepping into the river, priests murmuring prayers, the current moving steadily past ankles and knees, carrying old lives downstream. Churches grew slowly at first, simple structures of mud brick and stone, their interiors cool and shadowed. Over time they became more ambitious. Walls thickened, roofs rose higher. Light was carefully controlled, entering through small windows to create pools of illumination that moved throughout the day. This was architecture designed for contemplation, not spectacle. Inside art transformed space into theology. Murals covered walls with scenes of Christ, Mary, angels, and martyrs. These figures were not distant or foreign. They were Nubian features. Their eyes were large and watchful, their skin dark, their expressions calm. This was not imitation. It was identification. The sacred had become local. Liturgical life followed a gentle rhythm. Prayers were recited at set hours. Fasts were observed with discipline. Feasts brought quiet celebration rather than excess. Music was simple voices rather than instruments, chants that rose and fell like breath. The spoken word held great power. Scripture was read aloud, translated gradually into Old Nubian, so that meaning could settle deeply into everyday understanding. Monastic life took root as well. Small communities of monks and nuns withdrew to the edges of settlements or into desert spaces, seeking closeness to God through silence and labor. They copied texts, tended gardens, offered counsel. Their presence reinforced the idea that holiness could be found in restraint and patience, values already respected in Nubian society. Kings embraced Christianity not only as belief, but as a framework for governance. rulership became inseparable from faith. A king was expected to defend the church, uphold moral order, and rule with justice, reflective of divine law. Coronations took place within sacred spaces, surrounded by clergy whose prayers bound earthly authority to heavenly sanction. This alliance between throne and altar strengthened Makuria's internal unity. Christianity offered a shared identity that transcended clan and region. It connected the kingdom to the wider Christian world while reinforcing its independence. Makuria was Christian, but it was not Byzantine. It was Nubian, first interpreting faith through its own history and land. Daily life absorbed Christian ethics quietly. Marriage rituals changed. Burial practices evolved, though reverence for ancestors remained. Graves were oriented with care. Crosses appeared on jewelry doorways and pottery, not as decoration alone, but as protection. Faith moved through households, shaping how people understood suffering, hope, and continuity. There were debates, of course. Not everyone accepted change at the same pace. Older traditions lingered in stories and symbols. Yet, conflict was rare. Christianity did not demand the destruction of Nubian identity. It offered expansion rather than replacement. Over time, resistance softened into adaptation. The Nile itself became a living metaphor for faith. Sermons spoke of its floods as divine provision, its droughts as trials. Biblical stories of exile and return resonated deeply in a land that knew both abundance and loss. The desert, once feared, became a place of spiritual testing and clarity. At night, churches glowed softly with lamplight. Incense drifted into the cool air. Prayers murmured against stone walls, worn smooth by touch. Outside, the stars spread endlessly overhead as they always had. Faith did not change the sky, but it changed how people looked at it now, as a creation filled with intention and promise. The coming of the cross did something subtle but profound. It taught Makuria how to endure change without losing itself. It provided a moral language for diplomacy, law, and art. It bound the kingdom together across distances and generations. As you step back from the church and return to the riverbank, dawn breaking once more across the water, you sense that Makuria has entered a new chapter. Faith now flows alongside the Nile, shaping thought and life with the same quiet persistence. Ahead lies the world of ordinary days, the fields, workshops, markets, and homes where belief becomes practice and history is lived not by kings alone, but by thousands of unnamed hands. Life along the river banks. The Nile wakes before the people do, long before voices rise in the villages of Makuria, before doors open and fires are lit. The river is already moving steady, unhurried, carrying with it the quiet labor of centuries. Its surface reflects the pale colors of early morning, broken only by reeds bending gently in the current. This is where most lives in Makuria truly unfold, not in palaces or churches alone, but along these narrow strips of fertile land where water and soil meet. You walk along the riverbank as the first farmers arrive. Their footsteps are soft on damp earth. They carry simple tools, wooden plows tipped with metal-woven baskets, leather water skins. Fields stretch outward in narrow bands, carefully divided and patiently tended. Barley and wheat grow low and dense, fed by the rich silt left behind by the river's annual flood. Timing is everything here. To plant too early or too late is to invite hunger. Generations have learned to read the Nile's rise as carefully as Scripture. Work begins without haste. Men guide oxen through the soil, turning earth that has been used and reused for centuries. Women move between fields, gathering greens, repairing irrigation channels, calling softly to one another. Children help where they can, chasing birds from grain or carrying small loads, learning the rhythms that will shape their own lives. There is no sense of novelty in this labor. Its comfort lies precisely in repetition. Closer to the village's pottery workshops hum with quiet activity. Clay drawn from the riverbanks is kneaded and shaped by practiced hands. Pots are formed for storage cooking and ritual use, some plain, others decorated with crosses, geometric patterns, or symbols inherited from older Nubian traditions. Kilns glow softly in the shade, their heat controlled with care. A cracked vessel is not merely a loss of goods, but of time and effort. And so, attention is patient and precise. Markets gather near the river crossings. They are modest, orderly spaces where goods change hands without spectacle. Grain is measured carefully. Dried fish is traded for cloth. Leather beads and tools are exchanged through barter more often than coin. Egyptian currency circulates here, especially in the north, but it does not dominate daily life. Trust, reputation, and long-standing relationships matter more than metal. Traders arrive by boat, poling slowly against the current or letting the river carry them north. Their vessels are narrow and shallow, designed to navigate cataracts and shallow waters. They bring news from other settlements of marriages, disputes, festivals, distant dangers. Information moves as steadily as goods, binding Makuria together through shared knowledge. Scribes work quietly in shaded corners, recording agreements, copying prayers, drafting letters. Their tools are simple reed pens, ink made from soot, and plant resin parchment or wooden tablets. Writing is respected, but not common. Most knowledge is still carried by memory and speech, yet the presence of written records adds weight to law and administration, helping the kingdom maintain order across long distances. Homes are built with practicality in mind. Mud brick walls keep interiors cool. Roofs are flat, sometimes used for sleeping on hot nights. Courtyards offer privacy and light places for cooking, weaving, and conversation. Within these spaces, life is shared closely. Extended families live together, elders offering guidance, children absorbing customs without formal instruction. Meals are simple and nourishing. Bread baked on hot stones, stews thick with grain, and vegetables, occasional meat reserved for festivals or special occasions. Food is eaten slowly, often communally. Hunger is feared, but excess is frowned upon. Moderation is both practical and moral, reinforced by Christian teachings that echo older Nubian values of restraint. Religion is present everywhere, but never intrusive. Small crosses hang near doorways. Short prayers mark the beginning of work or meals. Saints are invoked for protection during illness or travel. Sundays and feast days bring people to church, but faith also lives quietly in homes and fields, shaping attitudes rather than demanding constant display. Music drifts through villages in the evenings. Simple instruments, drums, clappers, flutes, accompany songs that tell of ancestors, saints, and the river itself. Dance is restrained, rhythmic, communal. These gatherings strengthen bonds, offering release without disorder. Illness and hardship are part of life, accepted with calm endurance. Healers use herbs and prayers together, blending older knowledge with Christian ritual. Death is mourned solemnly, but without despair. Burials are careful and respectful, graves marked with crosses and offerings that acknowledge both faith and memory. The dead remain part of the community, spoken of with familiarity rather than fear. Children grow within this web of work, belief, and routine. They learn by watching. by helping, by listening. Formal education is limited, reserved mostly for those destined for clerical or administrative roles. Yet knowledge is everywhere in fields and stories, in the careful passing down of skills. What defines daily life in Makuria is not ambition, but continuity. Each person understands their place within a larger rhythm, shaped by riverland and faith. Change comes slowly here, absorbed gently rather than resisted violently. As night falls, lamps are lit. The river darkens, reflecting stars that seem close enough to touch. Conversations soften, work pauses. The Nile continues its steady course, carrying tomorrow toward the horizon. In these ordinary days, so easily overlooked, Makuria finds its strength, not in conquest or spectacle, but in the quiet discipline of lives lived in balance. Ahead, beyond the fields and villages, lies the structure that holds all this together: kingship, nobility, and sacred authority, the framework that turns daily rhythm into enduring state. Kings, nobles, and sacred power. As the sun climbs higher over Dongola, its light strikes stone walls and painted sanctuaries alike, revealing a truth that defines Makuria. Here, power does not stand apart from faith. It moves through it, guided by ritual memory and responsibility. Authority in this kingdom is not loud or restless. It is measured, solemn, and deeply entwined with the sacred. You sense this first, not in a palace, but in a church. The king's presence is felt here as much as anywhere else. He stands among clergy during prayers, not above them, bound by the same rituals as his people. His authority is believed to come from God, but it is sustained by visible devotion and restraint. A ruler who neglects faith risks losing legitimacy in the eyes of both clergy and common people. Makurian kingship grows out of older Nubian ideas of sacred rulership. Long before Christianity, rulers were seen as intermediaries between the human and divine worlds. The arrival of Christian belief reshaped this role rather than replacing it. The king becomes God's chosen guardian of land, and people charged with upholding justice, defending the church, and preserving order. Coronations are solemn affairs. They take place within churches surrounded by incense and chanting. Sacred oil is applied. Prayers are spoken in languages that carry weight: Greek, Coptic, and increasingly Old Nubian. These ceremonies bind the ruler not only to God, but to tradition itself. To rule is to accept a burden, not to claim privilege. Around the king stands a network of nobles, landholders, military leaders, and administrators whose power rests on service rather than inheritance alone. Noble families oversee agricultural regions, manage defenses, and ensure the collection and distribution of grain. Their loyalty is essential. Makuria's strength lies in cooperation rather than coercion. These nobles live neither in isolation nor luxury. Their residences are larger than those of farmers, but modest by imperial standards. Their authority is visible through responsibility rather than excess. They attend councils, advise the king, and mediate disputes. Their success depends on their ability to maintain stability within their territories. The church forms a parallel structure of authority intersecting with governance at every level. Bishops hold considerable influence overseeing spiritual life and education. Monasteries serve as centers of learning and moral authority. Clergy are respected not merely as religious figures, but as guardians of ethical order. This balance between crown and church is delicate. Kings depend on clergy for legitimacy. Clergy rely on royal protection and patronage. Neither can dominate without risking instability. When tension arises, it is often resolved through councils and negotiation rather than violence. This mutual restraint contributes to Makuria's longevity. Law in Makuria is shaped by both Christian teaching and customary practice. Justice is intended to restore balance rather than punish harshly. Disputes over land marriage or inheritance are heard publicly with elders and officials present. Written records are increasingly used, lending permanence to decisions. Mercy is valued, but order is essential. Military power exists, but it is carefully contained. Soldiers are drawn from local populations trained to defend rather than conquer. Fortifications guard key points along the Nile, and nobles oversee regional forces. Warfare is seen as a necessary evil, not a path to glory. Victory is measured by survival and stability. The king's daily life reflects this restrained authority. He listens more than he speaks. He attends religious services regularly. He receives petitions patiently. His movements are visible but controlled. Unlike distant emperors, Makurian rulers remain present among their people, reinforcing trust through accessibility. Symbols of power are subtle. Crowns are worn during ceremonies, not constantly. Royal garments are dignified rather than extravagant. The most potent symbols are spiritual crosses, icons, and blessings that mark authority as sacred rather than personal. Succession is one of the kingdom's most delicate moments. While hereditary principles guide it, approval from nobles and clergy is crucial. Disputed successions can lead to tension, but rituals and precedent help manage transitions. Stability is valued above ambition. Women within the royal and noble families hold quiet influence. Queens and noblewomen oversee households, patronize churches, and advise privately. Their authority is rarely public but deeply felt. Marriage alliances strengthen political bonds, weaving families into a unified elite. As the kingdom matures, administration becomes more sophisticated. Taxes are paid in grain and goods rather than coin. Storehouses are maintained for lean years. Officials travel regularly carrying messages and inspecting territories. Governance is slow but thorough. At night, the king's residence is quiet. Lamps burn low. Prayers are whispered. The burden of rule is heavy, and sleep comes only when conscience is clear. Power here is not intoxicating, it is exhausting. This structure, king, noble, church, and community, creates a system resilient to sudden collapse. It is not perfect. It depends on trust and shared belief. Yet for centuries it holds. As dawn returns once more, bells call the faithful to prayer. Authority renews itself through ritual. Makuria continues not through force, but through balance. Ahead lies a closer look at the kingdom's material expression of faith and power, the buildings, technologies, and artistic innovations that give Makuria its enduring presence. Painted walls and living faith. When you step inside a church in Makuria, the outside world falls away. The desert heat softens into cool stillness. The noise of the river fades into a distant hush. Light enters, carefully filtered through small openings high in the walls, settling gently across stone floors and rising to meet color layer upon layer of painted faith. The walls are alive here. Saints gaze outward with steady, unblinking eyes. Angels spread wide wings painted in deep blues and warm ochres. Christ appears not as a distant ruler, but as a present guardian, his face shaped by Nubian hands, his expression calm and watchful. These images do not shout. They wait. They invite contemplation rather than awe. Makuria's church art is not decoration. It is theology made visible. In a society where most people do not read murals become scripture. They teach stories of salvation, sacrifice, and protection through form and color. The faithful learn to recognize figures by gesture and posture. Michael the archangel stands armored a defender. Mary offers shelter beneath her cloak. Saints raise hands in blessing, not judgment. You can see the careful work of artisans who understand both pigment and prayer. Minerals are ground into powder red from iron-rich earth yellow, from ochre black from charcoal. These are mixed with binders and applied slowly to plaster while it is still damp, allowing color to bond with wall. Time is an essential ingredient. A mural cannot be rushed. Neither can belief. Churches vary in size and complexity. Some are modest, serving small communities along the river. Others are grander, especially in Dongola and other regional centers. Thick walls support vaulted ceilings. Stone columns divide space into aisles. The architecture directs movement inward toward the altar, toward stillness. The altar itself is simple but sacred. Covered with cloth marked with the cross, it stands as the meeting point between heaven and earth. Here bread and wine are transformed through prayer. The Eucharist binds community together, reinforcing shared faith through shared ritual. Sound plays a quiet but powerful role. Chants echo softly, their rhythm slow and repetitive, designed not to excite, but to settle the mind. Voices blend rather than compete. Silence is as important as song, creating space for reflection. Incense curls upward its scent, lingering, marking time in ways clocks never could. Faith extends beyond church walls. Crosses are carved into rock faces along travel routes, offering protection to those who pass. Small chapels appear near fields and wells. Icons are kept in homes placed where eyes fall naturally, reminding families of divine presence in daily life. Monasteries scattered across Makuria form another layer of spiritual life. These communities are often remote, set near cliffs or desert edges, where silence is deep. Monks rise before dawn to pray, work, and study. Their days are structured, disciplined, and intentionally repetitive. Through copying manuscripts, they preserve texts that might otherwise be lost, biblical passages, hymns, legal documents. Education flows from these centers. Clergy trained in monasteries become scribes, teachers, and advisors. They carry literacy outward, slowly expanding the kingdom's administrative and cultural reach. Old Nubian writing develops further here, shaped by the need to express theology in a local tongue. Faith also shapes time itself. The calendar fills with feast days and fasts. Work rhythms adjust accordingly. Certain days are set aside for rest and worship. Fasting periods encourage restraint and reflection, reinforcing values of moderation already familiar in Nubian culture. Funerary practices reflect deep belief in continuity beyond death. Churches often serve as burial sites for elites, their graves placed close to sacred space. Murals near tombs depict saints guiding souls, reinforcing hope rather than fear. Death is not an ending, but a transition watched over by divine guardians. Women participate actively in religious life. They attend services, sponsor church decoration, and teach prayers to children. Female saints hold prominent places in art, reflecting respect for spiritual authority beyond gender. While formal clerical roles remain male-dominated, spiritual influence is widely shared. Children grow up surrounded by sacred imagery. Before they understand words, they learn meaning through images and ritual. Faith becomes familiar, not abstract. It shapes imagination gently without coercion. What makes Makurian Christianity distinctive is its calm confidence. There is no urgency to convert others aggressively, no obsession with proving orthodoxy through conflict. Faith here is lived rather than argued. It adapts without losing essence. Even as political pressures grow in later centuries, these painted walls continue to speak. They remember belief when institutions weaken. They carry identity through change. As night falls, lamps flicker within churches. Murals glow softly, colors deepening in shadow. Outside, the Nile reflects moonlight, steady and indifferent. Inside, faith holds quiet and enduring. This union of art, ritual, and daily life gives Makuria a cultural depth that will outlast its political power. Yet even this rich spiritual world depends on connection, on trade exchange, and movement across landscapes. Beyond painted walls, paths stretch outward, across sand and water, carrying goods, ideas, and influence far beyond the riverbanks. Trade routes of sand and water. Long before borders were drawn on maps, Makuria understood itself through movement, not the restless movement of conquest, but the steady passage of goods, people, and ideas along paths shaped by water and wind. The kingdom lived at a crossroads where the Nile flowed north toward Egypt, where desert tracks reached east toward the Red Sea hills, and where southern routes opened toward inner Africa. Trade was not merely economic here, it was connective tissue binding Makuria to worlds beyond its horizon. At dawn, boats begin to move along the river. Their hulls are low and narrow, built to navigate shallow waters and rocky channels. Some drift northward, with the current sails catching the morning breeze. Others are pulled slowly upstream by crews walking along the bank ropes taut in their hands. Each journey is measured, deliberate, shaped by experience rather than speed. These boats carry grain first and foremost. Wheat and barley harvested from the Nile's fertile banks are packed into sacks and jars destined for towns farther north or stored in royal granaries for lean years. Fish, dried and salted, travels alongside them. Pottery, leather goods, and woven cloth fill remaining space. Trade here favors practicality over luxury. From Egypt come different cargoes. Fine textiles, metal tools, glassware, and religious texts arrive quietly at Makurian ports. Coins circulate especially in northern regions, but they do not dominate exchange. Barter remains common. Value is negotiated face to face, reinforced by trust built over generations. The river is only one pathway. Beyond the green strip of cultivation lie desert routes etched faintly into sand and stone. Caravans move slowly eastward toward the Red Sea hills, where gold is mined from narrow veins in harsh terrain. These journeys are dangerous, undertaken by those who know the desert's moods. Water is rationed carefully. Travel is timed to seasons when heat is survivable, yet the reward is significant. Gold brings Makuria quiet influence, strengthening its position without provoking envy. Other routes lead south and west, connecting Makuria to pastoral communities and forested regions far beyond the Nile. From these lands come cattle, ivory, animal hides, and knowledge of distant peoples. Traders speak many languages, switching easily between Nubian dialects, Arabic, and Coptic as needed. Their role is not only commercial but diplomatic. They carry news, negotiate alliances, and maintain peace along fragile routes. Makuria's rulers understand the importance of controlling trade without strangling it. Taxes are collected modestly, often in goods rather than coin. Storehouses are maintained near ports and crossings. Officials monitor flows, ensuring fairness without imposing heavy burdens. Excessive control would drive traders elsewhere. Leniency keeps routes alive. Markets near river crossings become places of quiet diversity. You might hear multiple languages spoken softly under shaded awnings. Goods are displayed simply, no shouting, no spectacle. Deals are made through conversation gestures and shared meals. Disputes are rare settled by elders or officials when they arise. Trade also carries ideas. Religious texts arrive from Egypt and the wider Christian world, enriching Makuria's theological life. Artistic styles influence local mural painting, though always adapted rather than copied. Administrative practices evolve through contact-strengthening governance. Makuria remains open yet selective, absorbing what fits its identity. Diplomacy often travels alongside trade. Treaties are discussed in market towns. Envoys arrive by boat, welcomed with ceremony, but not excess. The most famous of these arrangements, the long-standing agreement between Makuria and Islamic Egypt, rests on mutual benefit rather than domination. Trade continues even as religious landscapes differ, proving that coexistence is possible through respect and restraint. Caravanserais and rest stops dot key routes. These are simple structures, walls for protection, wells for water space for animals and goods. Here travelers rest, exchange stories, and prepare for the next stage. These pauses are as important as movement itself, allowing networks to endure. Trade shapes social life subtly. Wealth accumulates slowly, rarely concentrated excessively. Prosperity is visible in improved buildings, well-maintained churches, and secure granaries, rather than lavish display. Makuria avoids the extremes that destabilize societies, neither impoverished nor extravagantly rich. At night, camps glow faintly along desert routes. Fires are kept small to conserve fuel. Stars dominate the sky, guiding travelers as much as any landmark. Along the riverboats anchor quietly, their crews sleeping beneath open skies, listening to water lap against wood. Trade teaches patience. Journeys take weeks or months, delays are expected, losses occur, yet persistence defines success. Makuria's traders understand that endurance, not speed, sustains connection. As centuries pass, these routes strengthen Makuria's position. The kingdom becomes known as reliable, stable, and fair. Its goods are trusted, its agreements honored. Influence spreads not through force but through presence. Yet trade is never static. Routes shift. New powers emerge. The very networks that sustain Makuria will one day bypass it, contributing to decline. For now, however, movement continues quiet and purposeful. As dawn returns once more, boats set out again, caravans resume their slow march, and Makuria remains at the center of flowing worlds, anchored by river and faith connected by sand and water. Ahead lies a story of balance tested, of peaceful coexistence with rising Islamic powers to the north and the careful diplomacy that preserves Makuria's independence for centuries. The long peace with Islam. The Nile does not hurry when it crosses borders. It flows with the same steady purpose, whether kings rule its banks or faiths change along its course. In the centuries after Islam rose in Arabia and spread swiftly across Egypt, Makuria found itself facing a new neighbor, powerful, confident, and guided by a different vision of the divine. Yet what followed was not immediate war nor sudden collapse, but something rarer in medieval history, a long, deliberate peace. You stand on the riverbank near the northern reaches of Makuria as dawn breaks. To the north lies Egypt, now governed by Muslim rulers. To the south stretches Christian Nubia, anchored in Dongola. Between them, the Nile continues its ancient work, indifferent to belief, yet essential to both worlds. This shared dependence shapes everything that follows. Early encounters between Makuria and Muslim Egypt are cautious. Raids and skirmishes test boundaries, probing strength and resolve. Makuria's archers, renowned for their precision, defend their territory fiercely. But neither side seeks endless conflict. The desert is unforgiving. Supply lines are fragile. Prolonged war would harm both. Out of this tension emerges an agreement unlike most others of its time. Known later as the Pact, it establishes terms of coexistence between Makuria and Egypt. The details evolve over time, but the spirit remains consistent peace in exchange for regulated exchange. Goods move north and south. Hostilities cease. Borders stabilize. This arrangement does not make Makuria subordinate. It preserves its sovereignty. Christian churches continue to function. Kings rule from Dongola. Faith remains intact. At the same time, Makuria accepts that the world around it has changed. Diplomacy replaces defiance. Pragmatism ensures survival. Trade flourishes under this peace. Grain moves north during shortages. Manufactured goods and textiles move south. People travel with relative safety. Envoys cross borders bearing gifts and letters rather than weapons. Mutual benefit replaces conquest as the guiding principle. Daily life along the frontier reflects this balance. Villages remain alert but calm. Merchants learn Arabic alongside Nubian tongues. Muslim traders pass through Makurian lands respectfully aware of customs and boundaries. Christian pilgrims continue their devotions undisturbed. Faith does not vanish under pressure. Instead, it deepens. Makurian Christianity becomes more self-aware, more rooted. Churches continue to be built and maintained. Murals grow richer in symbolism, emphasizing protection, endurance, and divine guardianship. Saints who shield the faithful appear more frequently in art. Kings of Makuria understand that peace requires vigilance. They maintain defenses without provoking conflict. Diplomatic channels remain open. Disputes are addressed through negotiation whenever possible. The goal is continuity, not dominance. This coexistence shapes identity. Makurians learn to define themselves not only by what they believe, but by how they live alongside difference. They are Christian, Nubian, and independent, yet engaged with a Muslim world without fear or hostility. Over generations, this peace becomes tradition. Children grow up knowing Muslim Egypt not as an enemy, but as a neighbor with whom agreements exist. The memory of war fades, replaced by routine interaction. Stability allows culture to flourish inwardly, untroubled by constant threat. Yet peace is never static. It depends on leadership, trust, and shared interests. As dynasties change in Egypt and power shifts within Makuria, tensions occasionally surface. Tribute is disputed. Raids resume briefly. But the underlying pattern holds. Neither side seeks total destruction of the other. The Nile itself reinforces this restraint. Floods and droughts remind rulers of shared vulnerability. Cooperation during hardship becomes necessity. Survival outweighs ideology. Makuria's ability to maintain this long peace is one of its greatest achievements. It preserves the kingdom through centuries when many states fall to conquest or internal collapse. It allows Makurian art, language, and governance to mature without constant disruption. As evening falls along the frontier, lamps glow in villages on both sides of the river. Calls to prayer and church bells do not clash. They coexist in the night air. The river reflects stars without judgment. But time brings change. New powers will rise. Old agreements will strain. Peace will grow fragile as pressures mount from within and without. For now, though, Makuria endures quietly, confidently, its faith intact, its borders respected, its identity secure. Ahead lies the kingdom at its height, when confidence, culture, and stability align to create Makuria's golden centuries. The Golden Centuries. There comes a time in the life of a kingdom when struggle recedes into memory, and confidence settles quietly into the present. In Makuria, this time arrives gradually, without proclamation, during the centuries when peace holds trade, flows, and faith feels secure. The river continues its endless movement, and along its banks life deepens rather than expands. These are Makuria's golden centuries, not because of conquest or wealth, but because of balance achieved and sustained. You sense this prosperity not in noise or spectacle, but in order. Fields are well kept. Irrigation channels are repaired season after season. Granaries stand full, their doors sealed carefully against pests and damp. Villages feel settled, anchored. People know what to expect from the land, from rulers, from one another. Dongola thrives as a capital of calm authority. Its churches are fully adorned now, their murals layered with generations of paint and meaning. Saints appear alongside local rulers in devotional scenes, reinforcing the unity of sacred and civic life. The city streets are worn smooth by feet rather than scarred by conflict. Markets operate with quiet regularity. Disputes are settled without bloodshed. Administrative life matures during this period. Written records become more common. Old Nubian solidifies as a language of governance and worship, standing alongside Greek and Coptic. Decrees, legal decisions, and religious texts circulate with increasing clarity. Language gives permanence to memory, anchoring identity in ink as well as voice. Education deepens. Monasteries and churches serve as centers of learning, training clergy, scribes, and administrators. Literacy remains limited, but its influence spreads. Written prayer shapes theology. Written law shapes justice. The kingdom becomes more coherent through shared texts and rituals. Art reaches a confident maturity. Murals become more complex, their compositions carefully planned. Colors deepen, figures grow more expressive. Scenes of protection, intercession, and divine order dominate. Architecture responds accordingly. Spaces are designed to support contemplation, guiding light and sound with precision. Craftsmanship flourishes quietly. Pottery improves in consistency and design. Metalwork becomes more refined. Textiles show careful patterning. These goods serve daily life rather than display, reflecting Makuria's values of moderation and durability. Trade networks remain active but controlled. Makuria continues to serve as a corridor between worlds without becoming dependent on any single partner. The kingdom's reputation for stability attracts merchants who prefer predictable exchange over risky profit. Wealth circulates without concentrating dangerously. The relationship with Muslim Egypt remains largely peaceful. Diplomatic channels function. Agreements are renewed. Cultural exchange continues cautiously. Makuria's Christian identity remains intact, reinforced rather than threatened by coexistence. Difference becomes familiar rather than alarming. Kings rule with increasing sophistication. Succession remains a sensitive moment, but rituals and precedent help maintain continuity. Nobles and clergy collaborate to ensure smooth transitions. Authority feels less personal and more institutional, less dependent on individual charisma, more on established structure. This stability shapes social life profoundly. Families plan for the future. Land is passed down with confidence. Religious festivals punctuate the year, offering moments of collective reflection and joy. The pace of life remains slow, deliberate, attuned to seasons rather than ambition. Even the desert seems less threatening during these centuries. Routes are known. Wells are maintained. travelers move with confidence. Makuria understands its environment deeply, using knowledge rather than force to manage risk. Children grow up assuming continuity. They learn prayers that their grandparents once spoke. They walk streets built long before their birth. They inhabit a world that feels secure, ordered, and meaningful. This sense of permanence is perhaps the greatest achievement of Makuria's golden age. Yet beneath this calm surface, subtle changes begin to stir. Trade routes shift gradually. New powers rise further north and east. Climate patterns vary unpredictably. None of this yet threatens the kingdom directly, but history rarely announces turning points loudly. For now, Makuria rests within its achievement. It has learned to endure without expansion, to prosper without excess, to remain open without surrender. Its faith is confident, its governance stable, its people rooted. As evening settles over Dongola, lamps glow within churches and homes alike. Murals catch flickering light, their figures seeming almost alive in shadow. Outside, the Nile continues its endless journey, reflecting stars as it has for millennia. The golden centuries are not defined by brilliance, but by steadiness. They represent a moment when land belief and society align in rare harmony, but time does not pause for anyone, not even for kingdoms that have learned patience. Pressures will gather, strains will appear. The balance that sustains Makuria will one day be tested. Ahead lies the beginning of change, the subtle fractures that mark the end of certainty and the approach of challenge. Cracks in stone and faith change rarely announces itself with thunder. More often it arrives like a hairline fracture in stone, easy to ignore, at first invisible from a distance, yet slowly widening with time. In Makuria, after centuries of calm continuity, the first signs of strain appear quietly woven into the fabric of everyday life, rather than imposed from without. You notice it first in small adjustments. Fields that once yielded reliably now demand more care. Floods arrive too early one year, too late the next. Farmers speak in low voices about uncertainty, about the river's changing moods. Granaries still hold enough, but margins grow thinner. The land has not turned hostile, yet it no longer feels entirely predictable. In Dongola, the capital remains outwardly stable, but beneath its painted walls and orderly streets, tensions gather. Succession disputes grow sharper. Where once transitions pass smoothly through ritual and consensus, rival claims now linger longer, argued behind closed doors. Noble families grow more assertive, protecting their own interests with increased vigilance. The church, long a pillar of unity, begins to feel pressure as well. Bishops remain respected, but disagreements over authority surface more often. Monasteries struggle to maintain resources as trade patterns slowly shift. Clergy work harder to preserve moral cohesion in a society sensing unease. Trade routes, too, begin to change. Caravans that once passed reliably through Makuria now experiment with alternatives. New ports along the Red Sea draw attention eastward. Political changes in Egypt alter economic priorities. None of this is catastrophic, but each adjustment reduces Makuria's centrality just a little. The long peace with Muslim Egypt holds, but it grows more complex. New dynasties bring new expectations. Agreements must be renegotiated more frequently. Tribute disputes arise. Occasional raids break the calm, testing boundaries that had felt settled for generations. Makuria responds carefully, aware that open conflict would threaten everything it has built. Within villages, social balance subtly shifts. Younger generations, shaped by centuries of stability, take continuity for granted. Elders sense the fragility beneath routine. Oral histories begin to include warnings, as well as celebration reminders that kingdoms can fade if vigilance weakens. Architecture reflects these changes. Repairs are delayed. New churches are built less frequently. Murals are retouched rather than expanded. The kingdom invests more in maintenance than growth, a sign of maturity, but also of constraint. Language, too, shows signs of transition. Arabic appears more often alongside Nubian, especially in trade and diplomacy. This does not erase local identity, but it introduces complexity. Multilingualism becomes necessity rather than choice, reflecting Makuria's shifting position between worlds. Kings rule with increasing caution. Decisions are weighed heavily. Authority feels burdened rather than assured. Military readiness increases, not for expansion, but for defense against uncertainty. Soldiers train more often. Fortifications are reinforced quietly without fanfare. Faith remains strong, but its tone changes. Sermons emphasize endurance, patience, and divine testing. Saints of protection and perseverance appear more frequently in art. The spiritual language of Makuria adapts to a world that feels less certain, offering reassurance rather than triumph. Despite these strains, daily life continues. Fields are still worked. Markets still function. Festivals still gather communities. The kingdom does not collapse into chaos. It adapts, absorbing pressure with resilience honed over centuries. Yet resilience has limits. The balance between crown church and nobility grows harder to maintain. Compromises once reached easily now require prolonged negotiation. Trust, though present, is no longer effortless. You feel this most strongly at night walking through Dongola after lamps are lit. The city is quieter than before. Conversations hush more quickly. Doors close earlier. The murals inside churches still glow softly, but their watchful eyes seem more solemn. Makuria stands at a threshold it does not yet recognize fully. The cracks are not yet breaks. Faith holds. Authority endures. But the certainty of the golden centuries has passed. As the Nile continues its steady flow, indifferent to human anxiety, the kingdom prepares consciously and unconsciously for trials ahead. External forces will soon press harder. Internal tensions will sharpen. The story now moves toward confrontation, not sudden, not absolute, but cumulative. The world beyond Makuria is shifting, and the kingdom must respond. Invasions from the north. The first warning does not come with banners or marching drums. It comes as rumor carried on the river voices, lowered glances, exchanged, a sense that something long held at bay is beginning to press forward. From the north, where Egypt's rulers now change more quickly and rule more harshly, pressure begins to build against Makuria's quiet endurance. You stand along the Nile as unfamiliar boats appear on the horizon. They move with purpose, their crews discipline, their flags marked by symbols not seen here before. These are not traders nor envoys. They are soldiers sent southward by Mamluk authorities who now command Egypt with a firm and often unforgiving hand. Their world is one of fortresses, taxation, and control, and Makuria, long independent, stands in their path. At first, incursions are limited. Raids test defenses. Fortified towns along the northern frontier are probed, their garrisons challenged. Makurian archers respond with a skill that once made Nubia fear their arrows, striking with precision from walls and riverbanks. For a time this is enough. The kingdom holds. But the balance that sustained the long peace begins to tilt. The Bakht, once a symbol of coexistence, becomes a point of contention. Tribute is disputed. Obligations are reinterpreted. The Mamluk state, driven by military needs and centralized authority, demands more than Makuria can comfortably provide. Diplomacy strains under unequal pressure. Kings of Makuria send envoys north bearing gifts and appeals to precedent. They speak of ancient agreements of mutual benefit, of restraint. Sometimes these words are heard, often they are not. Power in Egypt is now less patient, less willing to tolerate autonomy beyond its borders. When invasions come in force, they move swiftly. Mamluk armies advance along the river, using boats and overland routes together. Their equipment is heavier, their tactics more aggressive. Makurian defenders fight bravely, but the strain shows. Fortifications designed for deterrence now face sustained assault. Villages near the frontier feel the impact first. Fields are trampled, storehouses are seized. Families flee southward, carrying what they can. Churches offer refuge their walls, sheltering the displaced. Faith becomes solace as much as identity. Dongola braces itself. The capital's walls are strengthened. Nobles rally regional forces. Clergy lead prayers for protection, invoking saints long painted on church walls. The city does not panic, it prepares. Battles are brief and brutal. Makuria's forces skilled, but fewer rely on terrain and discipline. They hold where they can retreat where they must. Victory is measured not by territory gained, but by survival preserved. Yet the cost is heavy. Each invasion drains resources. Trade falters. Repair becomes constant. Confidence erodes. The sense of inevitability of continuity begins to fade. Internally, tensions sharpen. Some nobles argue for accommodation, others for resistance. Kings are caught between preserving autonomy and preventing devastation. The church urges restraint, but also endurance. Unity is tested under pressure. The Mamluk incursions are not continuous occupation. They strike, withdraw, return. This unpredictability is perhaps their greatest weapon. Makuria cannot settle into either war or peace. It must remain perpetually alert, draining energy and morale. In villages far from the front, life continues uneasily. Farmers plant fields unsure whether harvest will be theirs. Traders hesitate before journeys. Stories of violence travel faster than goods, spreading fear, even where armies have not reached. Faith adapts once more. Sermons speak of trial and perseverance. Saints are depicted as defenders against invaders. The cross becomes a symbol not only of belief, but of resistance and identity. Despite everything, Makuria does not collapse immediately. Its long habit of patience sustains it. Structures hold. Authority persists. The kingdom bends rather than breaks. But something fundamental has changed. The North is no longer a neighbor bound by agreement, but a source of continual threat. The long peace is over. As night falls after another season of conflict, Dongola's lamps burn low. The river flows on, carrying with it echoes of battle and prayer alike. Makuria stands wounded but unbroken, facing a future that will demand more sacrifice than any before. Ahead lies the most devastating trial of all, not invasion alone, but division from within. Civil war will fracture what enemies could not fully destroy. Civil war and fragmentation. When a kingdom has learned to endure invasion, it believes quietly, perhaps unconsciously, that it can endure anything. Makuria had bent beneath pressure from the north and survived. Its churches still stood, its king still ruled, its people still planted fields beside the Nile. And yet the most devastating blow would not come from foreign armies or broken treaties, but from within the very structure that had once ensured stability. The first signs of fracture are subtle. Councils take longer to reach decisions. Noble families begin to guard their territories more fiercely, acting with increased independence. Loyalties that once flowed naturally toward Dongola now hesitate, pausing to ask whether the center can still protect the whole. Succession becomes the spark. A king dies, and the question of who should follow him no longer resolves itself through ritual and consensus. Competing claims emerge, each grounded in lineage, each supported by different factions of nobles and clergy. What had once been an orderly transition becomes an argument, then a standoff, then something far worse. You can feel the change in the air of Dongola. The city is tense, its quiet rhythms disrupted by whispered alliances and guarded meetings. Armed retainers stand watch where once there had been trust. Churches still hold prayers, but their calls feel heavier now, weighted with uncertainty. When violence breaks out, it does so not in a single dramatic moment, but through a series of retaliations. A skirmish here, a seizure of land there, a noble refuses to recognize royal authority. Another raises troops in response. The kingdom fractures along lines that had long existed, but never fully hardened. The civil war that erupts around 1365 is not a single conflict, but a tangle of struggles, overlapping in time and space. Different regions align with different claimants. Some towns remain loyal to Dongola, others withdraw into local control, prioritizing survival over allegiance. For ordinary people, this is the most painful transformation of all. War with outsiders had at least offered clarity. This conflict offers none. Fields are abandoned not because of invading armies, but because local forces clash unpredictably. Trade routes collapse as trust disappears. Travel becomes dangerous even within familiar territory. Churches, once symbols of unity, struggle to maintain neutrality. Clergy attempt mediation invoking shared faith and history. Sometimes they succeed, often they do not. Faith remains strong, but it can no longer guarantee cohesion. Makuria's defenses weaken rapidly. Fortifications fall into neglect as resources are redirected inward. Soldiers who once guarded borders now fight neighbors. The kingdom's ability to respond to external threats diminishes just as internal wounds deepen. Dongola itself suffers. The capital changes hands more than once. Each shift erodes its authority further. Murals are damaged. Buildings fall into disrepair. The sense of permanence that once defined the city fades. In rural areas, communities retreat into isolation. Villages fortify themselves lightly or seek protection from nearby nobles rather than distant kings. Authority becomes fragmented, local, temporary. The idea of a unified Makurian state grows faint. The Nile continues to flow unchanged, even as its banks bear witness to human division. Boats move less frequently. Markets fall silent. Caravans choose other routes entirely. The kingdom's role as connector between worlds dissolves. Epidemics follow instability, as they often do. Malnutrition spreads where agriculture falters. Healing traditions struggle under strain. Death becomes more visible, more frequent. Burial grounds expand quietly without ceremony. And yet, even in this darkness, continuity does not vanish completely. Families cling to ritual. Prayers are whispered at night. Saints painted centuries earlier still watch from cracked walls. Identity survives in memory, even as institutions collapse. By the end of the Civil War, Makuria is no longer a single kingdom in any meaningful sense. It has become a patchwork of territories, some Christian, some increasingly Islamic, some autonomous, some vulnerable. Dongola remains symbolically important, but its power is largely spent. What enemies could not destroy through forced division has accomplished through exhaustion. The structures that once balanced crown church and nobility no longer align. Each pulls in a different direction, and the center cannot hold. As decades pass, external powers take note. The weakened Nubian lands offer opportunity rather than resistance. Influence seeps in where authority has receded. Trade networks bypass the region entirely. The world moves on. And yet Makuria does not vanish overnight. Its decline is gradual, almost gentle, like a river slowly changing course. The kingdom dissolves into history rather than shattering into legend. As evening settles over the Nile, once more fires burn low in scattered settlements. The sound of water remains steady, indifferent to crowns and borders. What was once a unified state is now memory, story, and remnant. One final chapter remains not of power, but of legacy, of how Makuria fades into other worlds and how its spirit endures long after its name ceases to be spoken aloud. When the churches fell quiet. The end of a kingdom is rarely a single moment. It does not arrive with a final battle, a last proclamation, or a closing gate. More often it comes as a long evening, when sounds soften, lights dim, and familiar rhythms slow until they are scarcely noticed at all. For Makuria, this ending unfolds gently, almost mercifully, as history turns its attention elsewhere, and the Nile continues its endless work. You walk once more along the river near Dongola, but the city no longer feels like a center. Walls stand, yet they are unguarded. Churches remain, but their doors open less often. Murals still cling to plaster their colors, muted by time, smoke, and dust. Saints look outward with the same calm eyes, though fewer people meet their gaze. After the Civil War's authority never fully returns. Local rulers govern small territories, answering to necessity rather than tradition. Some remain Christian, others gradually adopt Islamic practices through trade marriage and proximity. Change here is not imposed violently. It seeps in slow and persistent, carried by new rhythms of life. The Ottoman advance into Lower Nubia in the early 16th century formalizes what has already become reality. Nubian lands are absorbed into a larger imperial world administered from afar. Dongola is no longer a capital in any meaningful sense. It becomes a town among others, its past grandeur remembered rather than lived. Churches begin to fall quiet, not abandoned all at once, but visited less frequently. Roofs collapse slowly. Murals fade as plaster peels. Sand drifts inward through doorways left unrepaired. The sacred spaces that once held entire communities now hold only echoes. And yet silence does not mean erasure. Christian practice continues in pockets, especially in more remote regions. Ritual adapts. Identity reshapes itself without disappearing. Faith becomes private, familial, woven into memory, rather than public life. Daily routines change subtly. Arabic replaces Old Nubian in administration and trade. New legal frameworks appear. Agricultural life continues largely unchanged, still bound to the Nile's cycles. Farmers plant as their ancestors did. Children learn the land before they learn history. Makuria's art remains long after its politics fade. Centuries later, archaeologists uncover churches buried beneath sand, their murals astonishingly intact. Faces of saints emerge from darkness, still watching, still calm. These images speak across time, preserving a world that once balanced faith, land, and authority with remarkable restraint. The kingdom's legacy survives not in monuments alone, but in continuity. Nubian communities persist along the Nile, carrying language, music, and memory forward. Songs still echo ancient patterns. Place names preserve older meanings. The river remembers what people forget. Makuria's story resists easy conclusions. It was not conquered swiftly, nor did it collapse through decadence. It endured for nearly 1,000 years by choosing patience over ambition, diplomacy over domination, balance over excess. Its decline mirrors its rise, slow-layered, shaped by environment as much as by human choice. As night falls for the final time in this telling you, sit beside the Nile once more. The water moves, as it always has, reflecting stars that guided farmers, traders, kings, and monks alike. The river does not mourn kingdoms. It carries them forward in memory. In the quiet, you can almost hear earlier centuries layered beneath the present, the chant of prayers, the scrape of oars, the murmur of markets, the rustle of grain in storehouses. These sounds do not vanish. They settle, becoming part of the land itself. Makuria's churches may have fallen quiet, but they were never truly silent. Their walls held belief long enough to outlast power. Their art preserved identity through change. Their presence reminds us that history is not only made by empires that expand, but by societies that endure. And so, as sleep draws closer, the story returns to where it began at the river's bend, where land and water meet in patient conversation. Kingdoms rise and fade, but the Nile continues carrying with it the memory of Makuria, gentle and unbroken, into the dark and waiting sea.